finding this channel. Of course, Jonathan Fibonacci's been doing this for 2 years, kind of been on a little journey. What do you want to call this? The Jonathan Fibonacci return of Jonathan Livingston Seagull? How about Durango is a beautiful city in Colorado? I think I'm going to call it gratitude, number 17. And I say that because, if you watched my prior video, I was the number 17 comic in Durango in their recent comedy show, and comedy was always something that I, boom, I've always enjoyed and I've always kind of had a passion for. But like so many other people, I went to college and really just got caught up in chasing the American dream. And then boom, 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 boom. What do you think? 2 years ago, saw 139 and how a business kind of collapsed. And ultimately, I ended up in kind of living in my truck, like never really thought I would live in it. And then boom, I slowly went into homelessness. Of course, I never thought homelessness would affect me. Of course, I think homelessness is sort of one of those things that we're just now, I don't know. I mean, just look at the technology. So, just the miracle of being able to make a YouTube video that people internationally are watching. Of course, most of my audience is domestic, but here I am from homelessness, day 139, rave and rambling, 139. Jonathan Fibonacci talks about gratitude. And again, I never know really who's following this channel, and so I don't always want to frame every video from the perspective of homelessness, but yet homelessness is such a wonderful spiritual teacher. Of course, if you really get serious about spirituality, you start talking about real words like heaven and hell and the Spirit of God and Emmanuel, Jehovah, Adonai, and then there's kind of, what do you want to call it, spiritual light, where sort of they like the fruits of spirituality, but they don't really like words like Jesus and Jehovah and God and sin and where is your brother, and the story of Cain and Abel, and how Jesus said, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. And so you're like, okay, Jonathan Fibonacci, we get it. You're on a spiritual journey, sort of thrust upon you. Here you are in the hero's journey. If you want to go use beautiful Carl Jung's, Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, Jonathan Fibonacci. And I'm 41 years old. I'll be 42 in January, Capricorn, Team Capricorn. And so, I started over once. That's where I started my company, and that company, I pushed it to where eventually Jesus and I were making, $200,000 a year. And so, coming from really nothing, and I started that company with $3.58 in my checking account. So when I was in the mortgage business and I was in the finance world, and so when I closed my first loan with mylendingplace.com in Austin, Texas, 401 Congress, boom, I had $3.58 in my checking account. And then boom, I grew that company and just experienced a lot of provision from God. And even after, now that it's been, I ran that company for 10 years. 2 years ago, I've really looked at the things I learned in that experience. And now that I'm working for other people, I can see their business from kind of a Fibonacci perspective, because, I ran a company for 10 years. So there's kind of the biography of Jonathan Fibonacci. Boom. Now I'm a photographer, comic. What do you want to call it? Activist comic. Jonathan Fibonacci tells jokes. I don't know. But tonight, I want to talk about gratitude. Again, I kind of wanted to give a little bit of the backstory just so you kind of know who Jonathan Fibonacci is. And this channel has been growing for 2 years. Most of my traffic is in California, Texas, and Florida and New York. And it's been interesting to see it grow. And then, of course, I photographed most of the journey. I was in, I moved from Texas to Pagosa Springs to Durango. Then I took a road trip to California. I went to Los Angeles, Malibu. I taught at UCLA. And at that point, I had kind of burnt through my savings, and I was relying on friends and family, mostly my family. And then after I taught at UCLA very briefly, boom, I realized if I didn't get a job in X amount of days, boom, John Fibonojji was going to live in his truck, and I did. And then that's where a lot of my family support ended. And really the story of homelessness and how really at the end of the day, homelessness affects men, and it's simply men who don't have income, family, or friends. So beware workaholics, especially male workaholics. And there's a reason why workaholism is an epidemic, and yet it's so celebrated. Nobody really can call workaholism. Well, John Fibonojji was a workaholic for 10 years, and of course I made tons of money, and so socially it's kind of very acceptable. And then boom, no overnight camping, which is really just code here in Durango. Even though I love Durango, when you see things like that, what they're really talking about is homeless ravens get out. And so I've kind of learned the journey of homelessness and how cities, even beautiful cities like Durango, Colorado, how really at the end of the day, they're very anti-homeless people. In Los Angeles, one of the worst cities for homelessness, simply because it's an epidemic there, homelessness is, it's holocaustic. And a lot of times there's a reason why people live on the beach. There's a reason why they're living out there, simply because they're homeless. And so, and while in this journey I want to be personal, keep in mind I'm also a very private individual. Deep down, I kind of wish I were a cinematographer, but no, I studied biology. I went to Abilene Christian University, studied biology. Then I became a communications major just simply because I needed to get the fuck out of that school. Of course, I was married, not to her. This is a beautiful woman here in Durango. This is such an interesting story. Remember, she lost her dog. Her dog was named Ronan. Google what a Ronan is. And I was so pleased because, this very day was her first walk without her dog. And I have met so many cool people in this journey. And so to bring this smile out to a woman who literally walked up to me and says, "This is the first day I haven't had Ronan." I said, "Well, where's Ronan?" And we started talking about what a Ronin is and how it's a samurai. It's a samurai without a master. In fact, some people in different mythologies look at Ronin and go, it's a female samurai without a master, and just the metaphor of what Ronism looks like. Of course, John Fibonojji has an interesting perspective on everything. Boom, telling some jokes. Where's Ronin? So what is your master? Is your master mammon? You want to use that term? Is your master yourself, selfishness? You're like, yep. Is your master? And ultimately, what we worship, we'll reap. And of course, workaholism, when that job ended, I didn't really have friendships and relationships to fall back on. So I went homeless, and I learned the story of homelessness and how it hasn't been all terrible, and how there's beautiful manna, and I literally eat manna. In fact, from the Bible, I know you're like, all right, John Fibonojji is going to talk to us about the Bible. Yes, in the Bible there's a term called manna, and it literally means, what is it? Because God supplied the Israelites in their journey. And how homelessness, I think, while it's an epidemic economically, we also need to look at the spiritual aspect of, there's a whole generation of men without community, and when they lose often a job or a business, or maybe they walk out of a bad, toxic relationship, often a man, when he loses his girl, or he divorces, he wants to move to a healthier relationship. Ultimately, men lose everything, and that's why homelessness is really a male thing. I took this picture in Durango, just some beautiful Durangoans. I love this because they were so in love. In fact, I've never done a photo shoot where he kissed his, boom, isn't that beautiful? Boom. And how relationships, when we talk about homelessness, we need to talk about male relationships, because homelessness is really an effect of men who do not have relationships and who worship mammon and money. And in the American culture, that's the dream. And that's what men are taught to value: money, mammon. In fact, men, keep in mind that in most cities, the cities care more for their animals than they do for men. And that's not a Crimea River. That needs to be a litmus test. I think it was Gandhi that said you could tell the heart of a people by how they treat their animals. I would say it a little differently. Here's a Jonathan Fibonojji on this. You can tell the heart of a city by how much they invest in homeless men. In fact, here in Durango, I often see animal control vehicles that are really nice vehicles, but I never see any sort of resources for homeless men. In fact, I'm personally battling La Plata County, whatever you want to call them, because there's a system designed to get rid of men. It's the private prison system, and for me it's simply things like trespassing and parking tickets. But at the end of the day, boom, the box is the box. And homelessness needs to stop being illegal. And you think, well, how can homelessness be illegal? Well, if you really, really cared about the regular guy that goes to jail, not the big celebrities, but the regular people, the ravens in your neighborhood, the homeless men in your church. There's a system designed to get rid of them from your communities, and how federally protected statuses matter, and how we need to care as much for men, or ravens as I like to call them, because homelessness is a really outdated term, because homelessness is not a person, it's a status. So how much does your city spend on animal control? And then email me and tell me, how much does your county spend on homelessness or homeless shelters or food banks, manna? And then here's another one, church people. If you love Jesus, how much does your church invest in homeless men? How many people, pastors, does your church feed? I don't care what you believe. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. And often we give such privilege to animals while we put men, often minority men, especially minority men, and our beautiful Native Americans, we put them in boxes. But I mentioned a long time ago that this channel was going to be about gratitude. So one thing I'm grateful for is I'm grateful for technology, even though I talk so much about the negative effects of it and how Facebook is actually very negative when it comes to real relationships, and really who's having the conversation of what Facebook is doing to the relationships in your life, in my life. Because let me tell you, man, you don't have 500 friends. You don't even have 300. Most men, according to statistics that I've read, most men, when they get to 40 and 50 years old, don't have a single friend that's not tied to their family or to their business. So what happens, men, when that business goes night-night? What happens, men, when you lose family and friends? Because let me tell you something, I know from firsthand experience that there's nothing more offensive to your friends and family than an unemployed man. And how we need to have a conversation about men's rights and how we value men and how the men are objectified. And often we're talking about feminism and feminism this, and every fourth story in the New York Times is about feminism and the need for extended or expanded feminine privilege. But yet females own the civil courts. Females literally have their own court systems. And it's men who go to the box. It's men who die in the woods. It's men who sing Jolene. Of course, that's Jonathan Fibonojji. So I'm grateful that I can tell this story because I've decided I'm going to go out with Jesus. And I want this story told. Jonathan Fibonojji, well, who the fuck is that? What I care about is telling the truth. And most of my life, I've wanted really one thing. I've simply wanted to be honest with myself and the people that I loved. I wanted real friends. But I didn't even know what real relationships were because I didn't know what a functional family was, because you don't know what you don't know. So Jonathan Fibonojji is going to talk about relationships and male relationships and how the church needs to get involved in building male community. And at the very least, feed my sheep. Jesus the Christ said, feed my sheep. So men, pastors, tell me this. How much is your light bill? Pastors, email me. I keep saying Google. So pastors, here's a challenge for you. Here's a Fibonojji. Pastors, tell me what your church spends on their utility bills. You're like, holy shit, John Fibonojji is really taking this seriously. He really believes that Jesus the Christ wants you to feed the sheep, wants you to shepherd the sheep. Holy shit, Jonathan Fibonojji is actually saying that Jesus the Christ is demanding that from our churches. So pastors, let me ask you a question. How many homeless men or people or children did you feed last week? And then put that in the comments or email me. Jonathan, email me at americano417@gmail.com. Pastors, tell me how many ravens you're feeding. And then compare that to your utility bill. Because most churches will spend, I don't know, what's the average church spend on utility bills? What, $1,000, maybe $500? Churches should be spending at least that feeding ravens. And when was the last time you heard a church helping the minority, the beautiful ravens? How many times have you heard, or how many times have you witnessed mega churches or these big churches or these pastors that are famous for selling books, but holy shit, how many homeless people are their churches feeding? If I showed up in Joel Osteen's beautiful home, and I like Joel Osteen's, or his beautiful church, and I asked Joel Osteen, how many ravens are you feeding? What would he say? So Joel Osteen, let me know, how many ravens did you feed last week? And I'll bring my YouTube station, and I want to see it, and I want to show it. So if you're feeding, I don't know, 10,000 people, I mean, your facility is 100 million. So Joel, here's a question for you, and I like you. You're a good voice. You're a voice of hope. You're also just fucking famous. So let me just pick on the fame a little bit. Jonathan Fibonojji picks on Joel Osteen. Or even my favorite pastor, Joyce Meyer, or maybe Rick Warren. I mean, there's tons of famous pastors. How many ravens are they feeding? And compare that to your utility bill. And if there's a delta, come on, we need to go back to Jesus' words, where Jesus simply said, feed my sheep. And if we look at the character of Jesus the Christ, he didn't chase the American dream. Jesus the Christ didn't tell us that our answers are going to be with electing the right city official or national figure. Jesus the Christ said, be my disciples. Jesus the Christ told stories of the Good Samaritan. Are we in the church? Are we speaking about the Good Samaritan? And when was the last time your pastor even talked about the spirit of mammon? And if your pastor is scared to speak to the spirit of mammon, then email me and I'll come speak to your church. And I would like to tell you the story of why mammon is a real spirit, to be respected and feared, because money is a deceiver. Money's not evil, but money's a liar. In fact, the Bible I recently read in one of the passages It says that the love of the world will push out the love of God in our lives. And that's how mammon works. Mammon strangles our love of God, and then ultimately our love for God, and then ultimately there's nothing left but mammon. And that's how the Spirit works. Gratitude. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Tonight, took some pictures. Last night I did some comedy, and I'm so thankful for Durango, because it's not a perfect city, but it is a beautiful city, and it does so much for its community. In fact, last night, or tonight, you can see on the time, for some reason, they just decided to put some balloons out there and light the fuck out of them. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, it's gorgeous. Those are balloon propane tanks. Jonathan Fibonojji, boom. Isn't that beautiful? Thank you, Durango. Durango does so much for its ravens, and I hope that my voice will even make Durango a better city for ravens. And I hope that my voice will help your city or your church be kinder to ravens. Because let me say something about homelessness, which is, again, such an economic status. It's not a person, so don't call a person homeless, because it's an economic status. Remember, I used to be making $200,000 a year. The idea of going homeless for 139 days was as absurd to me. Boom. And what workaholism, and how I have found a faith that I would love to give you without the burden and the pain of homelessness and losing virtually every friend and relationship. Thank you, Durango. First National fucking Bank. There's so many fucking, and how we need to talk about banking and politics and all that shit, and how we got to get our banks back, and how Dodd-Frank is going to strangle this country, and how we don't even know that, because when you're choking to death, you don't know you're choking to death. I love this picture. Boom. Look at that community. Thank you, Durango, for being a great city to photograph. And for some reason, boom. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Comic 17, John Fibonacci's out.